Yeah, hello everyone, and welcome to today's Drug Hunter Flash Talk. I'm your host, Dennis Koester, Director of Industry Research and Relations here at Drug Hunter, and I'm happy you guys are all here today. Today, we will be discussing VC investing and company creation with Florencia Segal. Hi, Florencia, we're glad to have you.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. And yeah, we also have our CEO, Dennis Hu, with us today. Dennis, good morning. How are you doing?
Hey, good morning. Yeah, great to have you, Florencia. Really looking forward to our discussion.
Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure to, share a few housekeeping items. So first of all, I want to let you know that we're trying a new format today. So rather than doing a presentation, we're doing a fireside chat today. So we'll be having an interview style, you know, presentation today, I guess, where both Dennis and I will ask Florencia questions about the topic of VC investing and company creation, and it'll be a little different from the typical Flash Talk format. So please bear with us, and I'll repeat that once we're in the middle of the discussion. Now, without further ado, I want to introduce our guest, Florencia Segal. Florencia is a partner at MPM BioImpact and is an infectious disease physician-scientist and a drug development leader. She also serves on the board of directors of MPM's portfolio company, Antiva Biosciences. And prior to her time at MPM BioImpact, Florencia was the global head of translational medicine at the Global Health Group at Novartis, which is where we actually met. And during that time, her group developed the early stage portfolio, including small molecules and biologics for the treatments of viruses, bacteria, and parasites. And prior to her time in industry, Florencia was a principal investigator leading a translational laboratory research focused on HIV immunology at the Reagan Institute of MGH and at MIT and Harvard. Florencia earned her MD with honors at the Universidad Central de Venezuela and completed her specialty in infectious diseases and postdoctoral training at the Brigham and Women's and Massachusetts General Hospital. And she remains a faculty member and an associated physician at the Division of Infectious Diseases at Brigham Young and Women's Hospital, where she has practiced for over 15 years. Florencia, this is really impressive that you're basically a drug development leader and literally live the concept from bench to bedside. That's super, super impressive. And we're glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for such a warm introduction, and really happy to dive in and share what I can of all the different aspects of my drug development and investor and physician expertise.
All right. Yeah, no, that sounds awesome. As usual, we're going to start with some icebreaker questions where Dennis and I will take turns. So Dennis, would you like to ask the first question maybe?
Sure, yeah. It's great to hear about your fantastic career. So what inspired you to start a career in drug discovery, Florencia?
I think it was the possibility of learning how to make medicines that could change people's lives. I wanted to sort of learn how to translate knowledge into tangible products. I had prescribed so many life-changing therapies in my HIV practice, but had very little understanding of the discovery or the development process. So when the opportunity came up to transition from translational academic research to actually translational medicine in a group that was had a lot of depth in infectious diseases science, it seemed like a no-brainer at the time, and probably one of the best decisions I've made in my career, for sure.
Nice. Yeah, Florencia, we worked on a lot of programs together, right? So I wonder, what is your favorite molecule and why?
Oh
As
my
a
God.
chemist, I wonder that, of course, right?
Yeah, you're definitely putting me on the spot because, we had so many programs at Novartis. I don't want to play favoritism, but I have to say, as a non-chemist, I have a few favorite molecules that really are my favorite programs. And I think two of them come to mind. One of them is still is, even though it's no longer my program, it's a PI4K soft drug inhibitor for the treatment of a parasite called Cryptosporidium. And we were developing this compound for the treatment of children in low and middle income countries, malnourished, and children that have significant morbidity and mortality from this disease. And the other one that really comes to mind is a combination of monoclonal antibodies for the prevention and treatment of cytomegalovirus, which is a virus that, as some of you may know, reactivates in the setting of immunosuppression, and it can cause severe disease, both in the transplant populations as well as in neonates, because it's transmitted mother to child. And part of the reason those are my favorite programs, that are molecules, so to speak, is because they were really challenging on the translational space, and I'm the kind of person that sort of thrives with that type of challenge. I mean, they were very clever solutions to problems that were not sort of easy to translate on the pharmacokinetics, on the safety, on the toxicology. The soft drug particularly was really a fascinating ingenuity of developing a molecule that would be crossing the epithelium of the gastrointestinal tract to treat an intracellular parasite, and then be rapidly metabolized in the liver to avoid systemic toxicities, which, as you can imagine, as a translational person, poses a lot of challenges to measure PK in the clinic, because you can't really cannulate the portal vein of individuals as you can of animals. So I have great memories of those two programs. I mean, the second program really inspired me to try difficult things. You can envision that developing drugs for pregnant women is not easy. It comes with a lot of regulatory and safety concerns. So yeah, I have fond memories of those two, but really loved almost any of the molecules I worked with, including the one I work with you. So the LXC program. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Florencia.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Wendy had a great point to that end as well, that perhaps the regulation on pregnant women really impacted the development of drugs for women over time. And we should probably have a panel with you and Wendy and others on that topic as well.
Oh, I would love to. I mean, it was really, I felt very passionate about driving this indication forward. And we, of course, met resistance at every step of the way. But yeah, it was really, really an exciting program.
Fascinating. Well, that leads us to our next question. So what are you most excited about in drug discovery today?
I'm most excited about the intersection of technology and biology. I think we have seen, obviously, over the last 20 years, sort of an explosion of new biology, new discoveries, and new technologies applied to solve some of these very complex biological problems. And I think we're just sort of scratching the surface. So I love to, again, as a physician-scientist and as a translational medicine drug developer, and now as a sort of early and sort of company builder and investor, I really love straddling the line of early discoveries and how do we use these technologies for the best, the best purpose. So I'm super excited about all the new modalities that we have. I mean, we used to just prescribe small molecules when I was in medical school training, and now we have all these therapeutic modalities that are really born out of this intersection of technology and biology. What is the best technology to solve this particular biological problem? So sort of fascinating by the things that we can do, from small molecules to antibodies, bispecifics, RNAs, gene therapies. Really exciting to me what's ahead. And I think we're somewhat breaking the glass ceiling of cures. I think this intersection of biology and technology really allows us to break that glass ceiling and start sort of curing chronic diseases, which is, as a physician, it's incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, totally. I mean, especially in the HIV space that you've been active in, where we maybe have like something like a vaccine right now, which is dosed every half year only, which is crazy. So yeah, and new MOAs, the molecules are getting more and more complex. As you said, we're going beyond small molecules. It's really super, super cool time to be alive in drug discovery. I feel very fortunate.
Yeah.
as a next question, so if you could go back to the beginning of your career and give yourself some career advice, what would you tell your younger self?
Wow, that's it's I mean, I get asked that um commonly. People like to go back, and I'm not great at going back because I feel like you can't really change the past. So, but if I had to think about something that I learned relatively late, I would say, is really the importance of emotional intelligence in our careers. So I think very early in my training, I was very focused on technical expertise and technical um, knowledge. And I think over time, as you sort of progress in your career, you really start seeing that a lot of what we can achieve with with technical expertise, it really comes out of more sort of soft skills, more sort of the emotional intelligence side of things. So I wish I had put more effort into that earlier, sort of understanding my own thinking and my own biases and my own sort of, having a lot of self-reflection and thinking about relationships, because it's always about the team, it's always about the people. And I see it today as an investor. I mean, sometimes we see great ideas, but if the teams cannot execute on those great ideas, then that's usually very high risk. So I would probably go back and spend some time and effort, not just on the technical skills, but on the sort of emotional intelligence skills. I think they really pay off in many ways in our professional and personal lives.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing, Florencia. That's a wonderful answer. And I think I have the last icebreaker question here, which is, as a translational leader, how did you find out about Drug Hunter, and what do you like most about it?
Oh, I mean, first of all, I think I love the name Drug Hunters. It sort of conveys a certain hunger for discovery, for learning, for knowledge. And that resonated with me right away. So even before I clicked, or before I knew, of Dennis making this career move to Drug Hunters, just the name already resonated with me and convey that sort of hunger for learning and knowledge and discovery. And really, I love the diversity of the community that you have built. I think really putting together in one place that sort of hunger for learning and hunger for knowledge and all this sort of various expertise coming from different places. Just the fact that you have me here today as a sort of investor says it all. That's by far my favorite thing about Drug Hunters. And I think it's amazing what you're building here, the community you're building and what you're sharing and how you're influencing the entire R&D space.
Thank you. Well, we're very lucky to have you here. And without further ado, I guess, Dennis, we can start with the questions about investing.
Yeah, or maybe before we launch into that, I want to briefly share an article that we have on Drug Hunter that I think relates to the topic that we're discussing today. So we have a very nice series here on mergers and acquisitions that I wanted to very briefly show you. So what you can see in those are the top 11 to 20 deals that have been made in the small molecule space. And of course, we're going to have a series on the top 10. You're highly awaiting that, as am I, and it'll come out next Monday. So what you can see here is really quickly the companies that were acquired, the buyers, the assets, the indications, and the MOA, and what phase it was, and the value of the deal. And then if you scroll down, you can see really the types of molecules that these companies have been acquired for. So you can get really the industry context without, just seeing the news on high level. You can really get the industry context of what are these molecules looking like and how do they fit in the overall drug discovery story here. Why has this acquisition even been made? And you might find some really interesting polydeutyrated compounds that were acquired when you browse our content. And again, this is just one of 4 articles in the series that I just wanted to briefly show you. And I'm encouraging you to read up on this. And basically, if you have any questions, let us know. We'll always be happy to answer your questions. All right, and without further ado now, we can launch into the Fireside Chat. And the first question that I have for you, Florencia, is What can you tell us about the economics of the biotech sector today? And do you think that we are already past the pandemic area?
Well,
Era,
that's a question on everyone's mind, right? What's happening with the biotech industry? Are we post-pandemic or not? So I'm gonna share a slide and some graphs, and this is sort of stuff that we put together sometimes when we talk with sort of investors, and also some of what comes out of the sort of annual sort of JP Morgan review that gives you a little bit of a sense of the state of the industry and where we are today. So hopefully you can see my screen. If you can give me a thumbs up there, Dennis, that would be great.
yeah.
So the sort of the market dynamics, obviously, and everybody who lives in the biotech industry knows this. So this is really not news for people that are embedded in the biotech industry. But the current market dynamics have certainly sort of impacted negatively the sort of valuations, both in the private and the public markets. And what you can see very clearly in this graph here, which has, on the x-axis time, starting in 21 and going all the way to the first quarter of this year, 24. And on the y-axis has sort of dollars and sort of billions of dollars. What you can see is that we really were in a somewhat artificial bubble coming, entering into 21, sort of the end of, not the end, but sort of in the middle of after the lockdown of the pandemic, and rightfully so, because of course we had to infuse a lot of cash and capital to solve a global crisis. We really had to develop therapeutics and vaccines to get us out of the pandemic. The contraction sort of started, and you can see again, the graph very clearly indicates how there was a clear contraction, which bottomed down sometime in the middle of 2022. The July 2022, since there is really the bottom. And starting in 2023 and now into the first quarter of 2024, we can start to see some of the rebounding. So we are seeing some economics pretty solidly. One of them, the M&As that you just sort of talk about. So the topic is highly relevant. Some of the fundamentals are pretty solid. But we're still in that sort of recovery phase. We're definitely past the pandemic bubble. We're not fully sort of recovered in terms of where we're at today.
Well, thank you for the excellent summary. And I guess speaking of that, what are the most important external factors influencing biotech financing right now, and what needs to change for a faster recovery?
Yeah, so there's a variety of both sort of external and internal ones. I think the internal ones are a little bit more solid. On the external side, and again, I'll show you some data that came out of JP Morgan. On the external side, one of the ones that we obviously have seen to a certain extent affecting the market dynamics is really the federal rate, right? So as you can see here on this graph, on the left side, you have the amounts of dollars raised, and you have time again in your x-axis starting in 2019 and sort of including the first quarter of 24. You have the number of rounds of deals that sort of were done. And what you can see is, again, in 2022 and 2023, there was a really decline on both the amount of dollars that went into funding as well as the number of deals that somewhat corresponded with the sort of starting of the rising of the tax or the effective rate, the interest rate, not tax, the interest rate. So long as there is very high interest rates, there's less cash coming into the industry from non-biotech sort of investors. And that obviously has a direct impact in the public markets. And as a consequence, it has a direct impact on the private biotech markets because we have less appetite for risk and less dollars coming into from non-biotech sort of specialized investors. That's certainly one of the things that we're watching carefully. Now, the Fed has indicated that they're likely to, start cutting some of this. So there are, I would say, good signs in the horizon, and that explains the stability of things like merging and acquisitions. And we're starting again to see a little bit of an uptakes even on IPOs, which are directly affected by this.
Yeah. And yeah, maybe related to your answer the question that you're excited most about, the new modalities and the different types of modalities. I was wondering, is there a particular therapeutic modality or maybe even a disease area within biotech that you think is doing well from a financing standpoint?
Yes, of course. I mean, you look at this curves and it seems like, oh my God, everything's going down. But the reality is that when you start granularly looking at different disease areas, different modalities, there are always things that are super hot. And that's one of the fundamentals that maintains the biotech industry pretty solid. And that's why we're optimistic. So there are obviously things like, RNA went through a massive boom through COVID, right? After mRNA vaccines. So anything related to RNA and delivery, how do we get this now medicines into all the tissues and all organs, so all the delivery space and has seen a boom. Antibody drug conjugates, I mean ADCs, right? We're past our monoclonal antibodies and bispecific into ADCs. So there's certainly areas that have seen growth even in this sort of overall contracted area. We have seen less focus on immuno-oncology and more focus on immunology as it relates to autoimmune diseases. So a lot of learnings from the immuno-oncology side are now sort of translatable into immunology. You start agonizing instead of antagonizing or vice versa, depending on the pathway. So immunology is certainly an area of growth. And then I would be remiss not to mention metabolic. And, we're all living in the era of, new drugs for obesity and metabolic diseases that are truly transformative and life-changing on so many levels. So that piece, and probably longevity, which is somewhat linked to that, is something that we continue to see sort of growth. And this slide actually is also really interesting because this talks a little bit less about the disease area and more about the stage. And this basically is indicating, for both therapeutics and platforms, the different financing rounds by different company stages. And what struck me when I saw this data, again, back earlier, this is coming out of the JP Morgan report, is that companies that are in phase 1 and phase 3, which are clearly generating clinical data, almost double their sort of financing compared to the prior year. So the last sort of column there is year to date in 2024, and you can see a not so subtle real increase in dollars. So people are paying for clinical data. That remains pretty robust, and it's great news for those of us clinicians, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess given the current challenging or the overall challenging financing conditions throughout the industry, do you expect a brighter future for the industry? And I know you don't have a crystal ball or anything, but...
Yeah, I do. And I think, we always talk at sort of MPM about, the fundamentals. Are the fundamentals there? And I'll walk you through a few of what we think are sort of the fundamentals that maintain the biotech industry sort of with a strong outlook into the future. One of them has to do with this sort of patent cliff that you've probably read about or heard about, which really has to do with the end of exclusivity for some of the biggest blockbusters that major pharma has out there. So I just listed there a few from Merck and J&J and BMS, but obviously the list is, you could probably do a whole list on, loss of exclusivity in the next decade. And what this does is it really incentivizes innovation coming from biotech and M&As from big pharma, and which is again the topic that, as you just alluded to, you're just looking into. So what you can see on the right side is that you have there the number of deals, which is that sort of black line, and then you have the total amount of cash. And both at the end, Q1 of 23 as well as Q4 of 23, you can really see an uptake on the cash, but the number of deals are, pretty stable by now. If you think about that graph starting in 21, we're in 24. So that gives us a lot of confidence, because what it tells you is that innovations are actually valued and they're actually being acquired to actually become products, which is ultimately the goal we all have. So that's a fundamental that I think it's sort of pretty strong. And this, again, really just shows you that in the last decade, starting in 2013 on the left side on the graph, and now in 2023, that the FDA continues to be on the upswing of approval of novel therapeutics. So innovation is not going away. That's pretty solid. And the ecosystem really is very integrated between biotech, creating innovation, and pharma, trying to mitigate the risk of loss of exclusivity by buying those innovations and generating revenue and sort of fueling this M&A deals. So that remains, I think, pretty strong and gives us confidence in the future. The other one is that the aging demographic, we continue to age, and we continue to develop medicines that make us actually live longer, and we want to continue to live sort of better lives. So when you look at the number of persons that are going to be over 65, that's a growing population. So from an external standpoint, there's going to continue to be medical need in a variety of diseases, chronic diseases, degenerative diseases, you name it. So that's a pretty solid fundamental that is there that's going to kind of put traction in the industry. And the innovation era, this is what we were talking about earlier. I mean, the amount of scientific and biologic discovery that we can do, the sort of genomics revolution. I mean, I remember in the early 2000s, I was doing collaborations with the Broad Institute and GWAS studies, and it wasn't really accessible to everyone. And nowadays, anyone can get a whole genome sequencing, a whole exome sequencing. So this continues to fuel innovation on the R&D pipeline. So I would say, yes, we can be optimistic, because really, I think the fundamentals are pretty much there in terms of sustaining and sort of getting over this current contraction. So yeah. I'm optimistic, but not a crystal ball. I will make no predictions as to the timing of when these things are going to play out.
Yeah, that sounds good, Florencia. In the audience, and I think maybe changing gears a bit, in the audience, we all had a question if you could give a general overview of VC investment and the creation of a company. So maybe you can talk a little bit about also what are the fundamental aspects that a VC considers when they embark on a company creation.
Yeah, of course. So there are different VCs. Well, first of all, there are VCs that are into company building, and there are VCs that are not, that only do investment. And of course, there are investors that are not VCs. There's angel investors. There's a variety of different types of investors. And then within VCs, there are some VCs like ours, MPM, but obviously others that are in the company creation space. And everybody has somewhat a little bit of a different model of company creation. So this is not to be taken as, a Bible. This is just one framework of company creation, and one that we put a lot of emphasis into. This is something that I just started exploring last year. Again, I've been in this space just a year and a half, and spent a considerable amount of time last year thinking about building a company in the infectious diseases space. So this is sort of my kind of rendition of what the process sort of was like. But suffice it to say that there's diversity. So first of all, it really starts with exploration of a particular space. And that's really, as we were talking about, the intersection of technology, biology, and unmet need. What problem am I trying to solve, and what is the best technology to solve that problem? Or do I have an understanding mechanistically of the biology that leads to that unmet need, so that I can think about an intervention? So that's sort of the first part. I don't know if you can see my pointer, probably not.
We can see that your mouse.
Maybe. Okay. So this is sort of this part of the ideation, exploration of the space. And then parallel to that, and this is something that we generally see missing in the people that are very much thinkers, which kind of sit in this quadrant, is really start thinking about the competitive edge and the market dynamics. And I don't mean putting together a full market forecast. Obviously, that's not what we do. But you really have to start thinking, there's an unmet need. That means that the standard of care, whatever that is not sufficient. And how are you going to differentiate yourself, not only from the standard of care, but from what others are doing? So sometimes people really think about, well, there's no therapy for this, and they forget to see, the 25 years of work that has been done to try to solve that problem. So the competitive edge includes both things that are on the market, but also things that people are working on or have worked on, and sort of the iterative process of failure and success. And finally, the market dynamics. I mean, there are, of course, things that are more rewarded than others. I mean, if you told me today, what's the space in COVID vaccines versus, 3 years ago, vastly, vastly different. So you do have to have a sense of that. That's sort of the initial sort of exploration of the space and where you land. Okay, I have this technology, this biology, this medical need. And while all of these are sort of favorable, then the next big thing about a company build is really build. And it's really building the team, which goes back to what I was saying about the soft skill and who do you actually need to make this happen? And it's typically a combination of course, entrepreneurs, which the VC founders tend to be entrepreneurial, sort of by definition. Is the people that want to build companies tend to go to VC to do that. And then you also have the academic founders, which are very deep in biology. And then you need technical expertise, and then you need, investor partners, strategic partners. So it's really a combination of that. And then the final piece that I think it's very critical as you assemble the team and have sort of your thesis, your value proposition, is to come up with a realistic value creation plan. So company building really necessitates and dictates that you have a very clear path to creating value that's beyond the capital that your injection. There has to be sort of a growth curve. There has to be a vision of growth. And the way to think about this is, you think about risks. So obviously the probability of success and the probability of growth is somewhat very closely related to the risk. And how can you discharge risk? Every time you discharge risk, you increase your probability of success. So what dollars are you putting to discharge what risk at what time point? That's sort of the framework I think about when I think about company building. And maybe related to your audience question about, tell us a little bit about VC. As I said, company creation is just one aspect of VC. There's a lot of VCs that don't do company creation, and some of us do both, do company creation as well as investment in established biotech companies. So this is actually something that, some of the principals in our firm had put together. They do, they teach some of the graduate students about VC that are thinking about it. And it's sort of a little bit of an insider look. And the first thing to understand is that, VC is trying to, put the money that, that feeds the funds that come from investors really to work. And we're looking at a time frame, so it's not unlimited. There's a time frame that we have that we need to generate value. The funds have a lifespan of 10 years, and we want to generate value within the first 4 to 6 years, so we can work on generating second and third funds. The industry, as you know, is primarily failures. We're in the business of saying no. Not just we're in the business of saying no, but most things that we try are probably not going to work. So you have to offset those failures for early investors with high returns. So VC is always looking for that. And the way we do that is we basically, bring in dollars and purchase shares of a company. And we sort of maximize our percentage of ownership. And that's obviously very high when we're the founders on the company, but sort of gets diluted as you advance. And one thing to really think about is that, VCs have very strong opinions because we see thousands of deals. And then some of those, you see the funnel there on the right. Most of the things we see don't make it to a due diligence exercise. Only 3 to 5 make it to an investment. So it's a real funnel. But this is institutional knowledge that the VCs have, right? They have seen so much, so many deals. So there's past experience, a network of experts that we have built over the years, and of course, the internal diligence of the teams. Ultimately, it's pretty simple. We just want to assess, is a drug or the platform, is it likely to work? What's the probability of success? Is it safe? Is it valuable? Does it solve a real medical problem? So it does boil down to the science at the end of the day, believe it or not, because that's what's going to drive success ultimately.
Thank you. I love this visual. This is a really great summary. I guess aside from company creation and financing, are there other important aspects of how VCs work that you think are, highly misunderstood or less well known?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know. I think a lot of people think of VCs, and again, there's a lot of variety, right? A lot of people think of VCs as a single type of group of investors that come and write you a check. I think the thing that I want to highlight the most is, again, the expertise that comes with expert investors, as opposed to your general investors that you find in the public markets. So a lot of VCs have scientists that have technical expertise, and they're deep in certain areas of technical expertise. And again, they have an institutional knowledge that is sometimes sort of lost in the kind of short interactions that we have with companies. So I would say that, I mean, and again, there's a lot of variability, but generally one of the things that's misunderstood is that VCs are just there to write a check. And that's not really the best way of thinking about VCs. We really are partners to the biotech companies, and we come with a lot of, in addition to the checks, we come with a lot of expertise on how to generate value for the company that's going to allow you to continue to raise, to continue to develop the programs. And the other thing is, the incentives. Obviously, a lot of people feel like, VC is just about making money, but really at the bottom here, at the end of the day, we do want to make sure that good things advance and make it into therapies and medicines, and that bad things are killed early so that nobody's wasting time and dollars in things that are not going to work. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest sort of things that I learned coming into VC from the drug development side that were definitely not obvious to me when I was kind of on the other side.
Very interesting.
Yeah, Florencia, I wonder, earlier you talked a little bit about the drivers of long-term growth being aging populations and the increase of the innovation. So I was wondering, how did you see like the development of the regulatory coming in there, like within maybe number of drug approvals and speed of approval? How has that developed over time?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. So we, I may even have, I don't know if I have a slide for that, but I'll talk about it. And maybe there was something, yeah, here's some regulatory environment. And I have strong opinions about this, so much so that I think next year we have our annual sort of summit that we organize for MPM. And this year I already decided that next year I want to build a panel on regulatory science. And I'll tell you a little bit about why I want to do that. But the regulatory environment has definitely changed in a positive way to drive innovation. Not at the pace probably that we would like it to be, but what you can see here is the median drug approvals per year. You have 2000 to 2009, and then the decade between 2010 and 2019, and you have a 60% increase. So that's not minor, right? And then you have faster regulatory approval. So the agencies obviously have recognized that for very particular populations, like the case for, this drug for pediatric leukemia, or for large unmet sort of needs, there are rapid approvals. And of course, there was the emergency use that we also with COVID that I don't really need to elaborate. So the time of approval is getting smaller and the number of approvals are increasing. But at the same time, and that's the positive side, that's the good side of it. On the negative side, or not the negative side, but sort of on the challenges and opportunities for improvement, I think there is actually a regulatory science. And this really has to do with what kind of data packages, sort of integrated evidence planning do we submit for, for approval? What kind of biomarkers, what kind of long-term outcome studies do we have to, do we have to submit, or do we have to commit, that really integrate the needs, not just of the NDA or the BLA, but really incorporates access. What do the physicians need to see? What do the patients need to see? What do the payers need to see? And really come up with a sort of integrated evidence planning, which I sort of love that concept, that very early on comes up with a data strategy that is really comprehensive beyond the NDA or the BLA. So there's a lot of room for that, I think. And I think there are certain aspects of the regulatory approval process that are still very, that could be improved in many ways. So it's a changing science, regulatory sciences, and it's critically important for our industry, for sure.
Oh, makes sense. There's a lot of discussion here about, probability of success and things like that. I was wondering if you could take us through, the logic behind how much a VC decides to invest, what percentage of a company to buy at a certain stage, or, what is a good return on investment? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on the stage of the company. And that's why when I show you those graphs about the different stages, you see vastly different investment dollars. Obviously, as a program advances, risks are discharged, right? So the upside of investing in clinical stage companies is that, pharma, and you saw that from the M&As, pharma really values milestones, which are typically clinical milestones, and actually discharge clinical risk to a certain extent. So if you invest in a company that is sort of in that stage, you have a relatively rapid turnaround, because you're going to flip a data card within, a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years. And in addition to that, having that rapid turnaround, you have already discharged a certain amount of risk of selecting a drug candidate and making sure there's scalability in the manufacturing. I mean, you already have GMP, you already have GLP tox, you have a full IND. So you can invest sort of later. It comes with less risk. The downside of that is that the delta, typically when you go in later, you own less of the company. So your delta in terms of the return is going to be smaller. As I said earlier, the way to offset the high risk of investing in a platform company or a very early company is to own a lot of it. And that's how you discharge risk, because by owning a lot of it, you secure a large return that's going to offset some of the other failures. Remember, VCs have a portfolio. We don't have a single program. We have a fund, and we have a portfolio that really tries to mitigate risk by going into different things. So, how much percentage ownership, it really depends on the VC and their own sort of strategy and how they operate. I think early company formation is something that requires a lot of cash, because it requires a lot of time to go from an idea to an actual drug. It's harder in this times of contraction, economic contraction. And that's why people are moving more towards clinical stage companies. And you see a lot more deals in clinical stage companies, because we're still contracted. And it's hard to make a big investment on something that's very high risk by definition, because it's very early. And, you don't have a lot of cash coming in from the non-biotech investors into the ecosystem. So I don't know if that answered what you asked me, but I guess that's not.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful. Definitely helpful.
Yeah. I mean, these days, I guess we can't have any discussion about, science and biotech and general developing technologies without talking about artificial intelligence. So I was wondering, and we also had that question in the audience as well. How do you see, AI and machine learning impacting, first of all, the development of biotech companies, and can AI also play a role in investing as well, or in decision making for investing as well?
I would say on the latter, no, we're nowhere near that of AI making decision for investors, I would say. I think on the first side of the question, on the biotech and sort of R&D and drug development in general, I think we're just scratching the surface of what AI can do. And I mean, you guys have a very large audience of chemists, so certainly AI-guided drug development is, you know, it's something that everybody's talking about, as you said, and everybody's going after that. And then as you move from discovery, really AI can play a role in all of this sort of data strategy. Some of the limitations is that, of course, AI, and in a way, it's a new name for something that people have been trying to do, machine learning, for years, right? So the concept is not so new, but a lot of it is the training data sets. So to the extent that the training data sets inform AI, I think it could be very transformative at all levels. You know, again, discovery, modeling, and really, you know, discharging risk and increasing probability of success based on modeling, and then even running clinical trials and selecting patient subpopulations and even the registration process. So I think it's going to be big for sure. I think we're still early and we're still learning. And I think there's probably a lot of hype, but it's real. I mean, I don't think there's any question that as the data sets get better in terms of machine learning, you're going to start to see better outcomes. And we started using some of it in some of our companies. So two of our portfolio companies have very specific, you know, products and ideas for which they've used it, and it's played out. So definitely people are using it and investing in it. And I actually think it's the right thing to do. It's one of this intersection of technology and biology. We can't be left out of it. On the second side, the one thing that I do think AI definitely helps, because we use it actually on a day-to-day basis, is, again, remember that funnel. There's thousands of companies that we see. It'd be very easy if I get an email from a company that's developing, let's say, ADCs, and all of a sudden I could click a button and just, like, you know, just tell me again all the things that we've already looked at in DC and what decisions we made and based on what. That would be amazing. It would make our lives easier. So some of that institutional knowledge that I was talking about, I think, can be leveraged in AI ways to help the decision making, not make a decision, but certainly aid in the decision making and helping us become more efficient, both capital and time wise, with all of this. So it's a really great topic, and it's vast, and I'm not an expert for sure in AI.
Thank you. There's a question in the Q&A box here. What do biotech VCs value more, pipeline or platform? Pipeline or approach? That's a pretty general question, but I don't know if you have a...
Yeah, and there's no winner answer here. It's actually both. I'll start with the kind of product versus platform piece. Two things that we've seen lately. One is we've seen a lot of platform ideas that are really, really cool scientific ideas and technologies, but there's been little thought into what the platform is going to be used for. So there's a sort of platform push. This is a great platform, and there's a very high-level idea of what it would do, but nobody has really nailed down the perfect application. What is this platform going to solve? What problem, in what people, and how does it differentiate? So that's not a great situation to be in, because we have seen, again, that people are valuing clinical data and actual products that actually modify a biomarker or a disease or something. So you have to be able to take the platform beyond just the platform. On the other side, which is the product, the thing that most VCs don't love is binary risk, right? If you have a single asset, a single company, that's a high risk because you're flipping a single data card. So in that sense, platforms are a little bit better because you can salvage some things. But at the same time, you know, you have to be very efficient. And one of the things, as I was saying earlier, that I learned from a colleague, an entrepreneur partner, he said this that really resonated with me. He said, again, I had probably been here, I don't know, a month or two. And he said, you know, companies don't die of starvation. They die of indigestion. which means you have a lot of things going on and you're not focused enough to generate value on maybe your lead program and your second program. So that's something that really has resonated with me. So you have to find a balance of not necessarily wanting to have a platform that is, a pipeline that is so broad that you lose focus and you're burning a lot of cash and not efficiently generating value, but also not having sort of binary risk. And if you're in the platform space, you have to invest earlier in recognizing that the world is more than chemistry and biology and technology. The world involves differentiation and marketing and physicians and payers. And so the early you bring that expertise and try to build the application for the platforms that are truly differentiated, the more value they're going to have.
That makes sense. I was wondering if you could talk about what success looks like in biotech venture investing. So, in SaaS, it's maybe more famous that, funds are driven by like the top 1% of investments, that if you invest a fraction in a Facebook or an Amazon or something like that, right, that drives the entire fund. Obviously in biotech, we don't have that many Genentechs or, Gileads, right? So, can you talk us through the math there or what the expectations are?
Yeah. Again, it's very individual depending on obviously the fund and whether you do private investment or public investment. But generally, we follow the principle that good drugs that are going to differentiate themselves are going to produce good revenue. And sometimes those markets have to be built. So a story of success is thinking early about what are the paths of value creation. Is a path an IPO, going public, and does the public market therefore is at a stage that it supports this value creation? So depending on where you are in terms of the indications, in terms of the disease, what are people paying attention? What are people, sort of that evaluation of the market. The other one is obviously a story of success of M&As, which you were just sort of talking about. What can you bring to the table to what companies that are interested in what space? Remember, companies have built sometimes entire sales force and franchises to solve certain diseases, and being strategic about how you fit in that ecosystem is a story of success at the end of the day. The math is, again, very dependent on the fund. But generally, we go in knowing that not everything is going to work, that we're going to have, high risk as we go earlier, but we're going to have higher return. And you're going to have some things, for example, in this type of market where you can flip data cards at a small investment, and those could still be wins. Not every small biotech needs to become a Genentech or a Gilead, but you have to have the optionality. So you can't probably build a company or invest a company just thinking, oh, I'm going to be acquired. That's not a winning strategy. You have to be able to have the optionality to grow. And grow means that there has to be investor money coming in, big time investor, not just VC, but sort of your crossover funds and your public non-specialty investors. And you have to be able to be attractive for an M&A.
Yeah, makes sense.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer, Florencia. And we have a really interesting question here in the audience that I think it's a little complex question. So yeah, sorry. It's if you could provide a little bit of advice for people that are trying to get ideas off the ground. And specifically, Tim is wondering about how it's possible to build a team maybe without funds. And basically then he's wondering about the approach one should take to engage VC with the pitch deck. And also whether one should look at raising angel investments or any pre-seed funds, or whether one should directly approach VC firms or any variants thereof. Very complex questions.
Yeah, a lot of things there. The first thing that kind of caught my attention of the question is, how can we build a great team without funding? I do not recommend that as a starting. So I'm going to go with, how do you find funding and from where? because I think building a team and building a company requires funding. There's really no easy way or successful way, in my opinion, of doing it alone. So that's not the route I recommend. There are obviously different types of investors. There are angel investors that, sometimes they can make life complicated down the line, because if you have a lot of angel investors, when you're bringing in institutional investors, things can get a little bit complicated on the financing. But for the most part, they can provide some capital without necessarily coming in with a lot of kind of expertise about company building. They're just sort of writing you a check. There's obviously grant funding and non-dilutive funding if you have an idea that is of interest to, grant funding agencies or philanthropic funding agencies, depending on the space you're at. And then there's VC, and this really boils down to network. Most VCs are willing to, or most VCs that are in the company building space are willing to hear an idea coming from, academia or coming from, wherever the idea comes from. The important thing really is to build a reason to believe. So, what you have to do really early on is try to build the data, whatever data can be built to give people reason to believe in this idea and to start coalescing around what I said, a concept that is solving an actual problem for which there's an actual need, for which there's a tractable path. So a lot of ideas don't have a tractable path. That's not a good place to be. You want to have a good idea that it's actually tractable and that technologically feasible to develop a drug. And you need for that an intersection of expertise. You need biologists, chemists that have an idea, but then you also need people that know drug development, that know what are the pitfalls, what are the risks. So I would highly recommend to try to network a lot in terms of the financing and who can support this idea, and to the extent possible, to start thinking about all the pieces. And when you don't have the pieces, you don't have the expertise, I think we can all be more humble and seek that expertise and not necessarily try to pitch and sell something that's really not very thoughtful. It's just sort of, oh, I think this is going to solve the world. So seek out that expertise really early if you don't have it as a sort of founder or entrepreneur. Pitch decks, which I think was embedded there. The role of a pitch, or the goal of a pitch, is really to get a second meeting. That's what you want, right? In your first pitch, you want to make sure you get a second meeting. You have to be able to articulate your value proposition very clearly. What is it that you're doing? What problem are you solving? For what population? What differentiates you? What other people have done and how are you different? And then end with something on the finances. What exactly are you asking for? Know your audience. Not all VC investors are the same. If you're going to pitch to me and you don't know that I'm an infectious disease doctor, and you spent 25 minutes telling me about the importance of antimicrobial resistance, you've wasted 25 minutes of your time. So you have to know who your audience is, right? And you have to know what expertise they have, and you have to cater to that with sort of data. And then the other piece is, you have to be a good communicator, and your data or your scientific reason to believe has to sustain the claims. And this is something that we also see a lot of pitches, a lot of claims, very thin on the data to support it. And it's okay not to know something. It's okay to have a thesis that needs to be tested. I mean, we're scientists, right? It's all about a hypothesis and it needs to be tested. We have to be humble about that and not sort of oversell, with flimsy kind of data. So yeah, there's a whole talk on how to give a pitch, and
Yeah, I like that. Thank you. So yeah, I wouldn't try to lecture you on like any antiviral targets.
I actually love to hear the passion, and I love to hear people that care about it as much as I care, but you've wasted time. Like you don't, so it's a bit of a balance. You have to know your audience and be able, if you're pitching RNA, know who the people are on the call and do they have expertise? Because also you can take more out of it.
Yeah,
So it doesn't really help you if, if you could learn a lot from that person who maybe was the founder of, like Intelia, for example. We have one of our entrepreneur partners who's, it would be, you would miss an opportunity. So
absolutely. So yeah, we're already on the top of the hour. This time just flew by. So thank you so much, Florencia. I really learned a lot from you during this hour of discussion. So really enjoyed it. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to Dennis. Dennis, do you have any closing words maybe that you want to share?
No, other than just thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'm sure everybody learned a lot. I see a lot of heart and thank you emojis here. So really appreciate your time, Florencia.
yeah, very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and a shout out to all the audience for spending an hour with us. We're really happy to be here. Thanks,
Awesome.
everyone.
So yeah, thank you everybody, and we'll see you at the next event.